Okay, now as we know, almost every data product built must have in the back of its mind the capability to be scaled up. What are the successes behind building for scale? What are the risks of not considering how a project could scale? Are some of the questions we're going to be diving deep into today. Now, we are joined by two experts to do exactly that. Welcome to the stage, both. Now, just a quick reminder, you have the ability to ask your questions. Do so in the question tab. I'd love to ask both of our thought leaders here joining us today their thoughts on your queries, and perhaps you may even have a comment or thought yourself. Please add those in. We would love to be able to read them. Well, welcome both to the stage. I think the easiest place for us to begin is if you could give us a quick introduction to yourself and your role. Pete, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Yeah, happy to, Catherine. Good to see you again. So Pete Williams, I'm the Director of Data and Online at Penguin Random House UK. As my title suggests, I have two main responsibilities. One is the online section, which is our website platforms. And the other, which is probably more relevant to this conversation, is the data function, the newly rebranded data team, as I call it. Emphasis everything on data. That's my passion and my driving goal, I guess. I've been in that role 3.5 years, and I was brought in to try and I think grant the opportunities that being the largest global publisher gives us in the strength of our data asset, and how do we turn that into a more efficient organization and better commercial performance, market share, etc. And I think can really drive what are more value add roles inside an organization when you're empowered by data and you can make better, faster decisions. So that's what I do.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to tapping into that passion during the discussion here today. Thank you, Pete. Mohit, lovely to see you again. Would be great to begin with an intro.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mohit Joshi, and thank you so much, first of all, Catherine, for inviting me today. I am a global head of data platform and data science as part of Collinson. As the title suggests, I've been looking to build a modern data platform as part of Collinson, has done it before, and we are just embarking on a journey to make it much better this time. As well as I have a responsibility to look after the evolution of our data science team. How do we build our data products using all the new forms of AI and ML? So working with Collinson for the last 5 years. Collinson is a really big company. It's one of the sector it is majorly working with is travel. So I think a lot of things which we do is for the customers. We try to understand and try to provide better customer experience. Yeah, I'm looking forward to have a really productive chat today.
Amazing, as are we. Thank you both for joining us today. So we do have, just under now 45 minutes in this discussion. So as I mentioned at the start there, get your questions in. We would love to ask our amazing thought leaders their thoughts on your queries. So I'd like us to begin by really discussing from your own experience, from your careers in data, what you really think are the key ingredients to scalability. What do you need put together to have a successful scale? Pete, I'll come to you first for that one.
Thank you, and forgive me if I look down at my list. I've been doing this for quite a few years. Just try to remember all the lessons from the past to make sure I capture some useful ones to share with your audience here. So I think this is the right philosophy. I always say start small, scale quickly. That's what you have to be ready to do. And I have smashed into the brick wall of not being ready for that scale before. So these are some of the ingredients that I think are relevant. One is use cases. You're not going to scale unless the organization wants what you're trying to bring to them, and more people are demanding more of it. If it's in a steady state, obviously you can't push scale. It has to be pulled from the organization and from the user base. So use cases, and therefore, from my part, evangelism for around the opportunities that the product and specifically the data is going to bring is what's going to bring that pull rather than push. And I think that's often the most successful way of leading change management, and therefore, this product strategy. So one ingredient, use cases, generating demand from the organization. The other relates to that, which is the audience. Who is it that you're scaling to? What do they want from you? And why is it important? The famous Simon Sinek stuff, start with why, is always much more relevant than I've got this great dashboard, I've got this great machine learning tool, you should use it because. Trying to spin that around and understand what your audience is struggling with in terms of delivering their objectives, Where are the opportunities that you can bring? And then, starting with that why, and then getting the who and the what nailed, so that the scale, you understand who you're scaling to. Another ingredient would be the strategy for development. So, the scale hopefully is going to increase. That will be I guess a cyclic orbit. So if you're going to start at one point, you've got to have somewhere to go. So what's the kind of roadmap, the intention, the strategy for the product that you're trying to scale in the first place? Because you'll need to start getting ready for what you expect to happen next when you start to scale. You can't just smash into the wall and then work out, what you should do about it afterwards. This is a problem I've definitely smashed into before. Something that I've identified as an ingredient, and jumping ahead to your next question, potentially a barrier, is the impact on roles and org structure. So quite a few of the things that I've rolled out have left, hopefully, a marked change in the organization. And in order to be able to use them successfully, the organization has to adapt to the product as well. It can't all be one way. So is it willing to consider that new roles, possibly new and possibly unwelcome pay bands are going to be involved, new reporting lines, and things that maybe didn't seem targeted towards the operation of the department before, and now the things that are going to generate opportunity. And are you ready to put those roles in place? And have you lined up the organization, the recruitment function, the HR department, etc., to get those in place in time to allow you to continue to take benefit? But I think that's both an ingredient and a barrier. And then the last one I've got is enterprise support. So an ingredient to be able to scale is making sure your environment is suitable for the size of the product you're trying to bring. So as it goes from a great idea within your team or within a small development opportunity into something the organization's got to consume, the last thing you want is for your team to become the huge support network for that if your team hasn't scaled with the product. So what you really want is to find a way to put that into the enterprise support cycle, so that the accepted support desk routes, email chains, message capability, phone numbers, etc., is there to pick up the slack, so that you can get on with developing the next great product, and the enterprise is using this in what's termed a BAU fashion. So making sure that you've got that support capability lined up in advance, they're ready to take it on and they can answer those queries. So I think once you've got all those ingredients in place, the most important one is the use case, and with those environmental factors, you'll be in a place to continue to meet your consumer demand.
Yeah, a really, really great list there. I was jotting down some notes, and those who engage in the business of data, content, and creating events often will know I'm an incredibly visual person. And what sprung to mind for me, Pete, when you were saying about whether the business wants them, it's a similar experience, and I appreciate it's a bit of a jump in an analogy. When you go to a supermarket, right? Less so since COVID, and they have the sample counter and they would give you a little sample. If you turned your nose up and said, "Oh, I don't like that," and then someone goes, "Here, by the way, here's a giant block of cheese," that you've just said, "That didn't work for me," it's not going to help the business, and you're going to have that distrust feeling of going, "Well, you've not listened to me at all." And I think it's a very similar scenario to what you were saying there about it's a case of doing it small. Is there buy-in to that? Has it worked? Is there ability to scale from the business's desire side, and then actually doing it yourself there? There's a few more threads.
What you're describing, I think, is the feedback loop, which is something I didn't mention, but it's absolutely vital. Is what you're building something people want to use? And so make sure you build that loop in whatever method to drive your scale. Sorry, I'm sure Mo's got some answers that I'm trampling all over his time, so please.
No, absolutely. There's a couple more threads I want to pull there, but before I do, Mohit, I'd love to get your take on what key ingredients are needed for scalability.
I think Pete has covered most of what I was going to say anyways, but again, I'm going to have my take on this. So I think I would start with the strategy. I think in terms of the ingredient, when we talk about how do we scale anything inside a business related to data, you need to have a strategy. That strategy needs to itself be divided into two parts, which is what your data strategy is and what your product strategy is. How do they connect with each other? First of all, do you have enough understanding of where your product is going? What kind of transformation, evolution are you going to be foreseeing in the future for that product, and how data is going to be fitting in that particular roadmap? Because once you have that foresight in a way, then you are able to first of all place yourself somewhere between the product and understand how data is going to be utilized in such a way where you are not only achieving a product roadmap, but also able to understand how data scalability is going to be important with respect to that. The second thing which I think as an ingredient is the organization maturity assessment sort of. We always embark on this journey of creating data products more often than not without knowing the answer to these questions, like I think what kind of data are we talking about, what is the volume of the data, what volume do we anticipate in a few years to increase? Do we have the right quality of the data or not? Do we have a governance and management framework to allow ourselves to use this data without worrying so much about all these compliance and rules that although we need to stick to those rule set, but at the same time we need to have a way to allow ourselves to work with them, and also we need to ask ourselves, I guess, where are we right now, and where do we want to see in I think in terms of being mature as an organization. I think very simple example would be when you talk about the maturity assessment, do you already have a data scientist without a use case? Or you have a use case but you don't have a data scientist. So that way you understand where you are with your maturity assessment. The third thing which I always emphasis on is the design framework. Anything which you want to work with the business, although you have a strategy, you now know what the assessment of the maturity looks like. Now you need to work on what is going to be that design, because that is going to be basically the foundation of anything you want to create. And for that, you will have to obviously start speaking not within your data team, but outside of your data team as well. And the last thing is obviously technology, tools, and the team. I have realized, I think in last 1 year or so, that technology should not be considered as a blocker. I think it's an enabler. The only problem which we see right now as part of any organization is getting all the people together and I think aligning all that strategy. So I think technology, that's why I keep that as last, because whatever you decide in terms of, I think what your strategy is, what your assessment is, what your design framework is going to look like, believe me, technology is going to be able to deliver it. So I think these are, some of the ingredients. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I'm certainly going to have to keep the eye on the time here, because there's so many questions I now want to ask you both based on just that set of answers there. So thank you for that. Now, you both mentioned strategy. Now, I think there almost needs to be that perfect scenario, right? Of one, having a use case that is working well for the business and can be scaled, but then the business also realizing that potential strategically as well, because as we know, the data strategy and the business strategy have to be aligned. Now, I'm assuming at points there's going to be tension between what we could scale and could be really great, but potentially doesn't have the most strategic value at that time, but would still benefit the business. And I wonder, how do you both deal with that tension of having something that could scale, you can see it as having value, but then the business just isn't in that place to receive that value quite yet? Mohit, I'll come back to you for that.
Not really sure how to answer that because that's a constant challenge. I guess if we talk about the business use case, the realization of that business use case would basically depend on, more often than not, on the commercial benefit we are able to generate for the business off the back of it. And we say that, I think a lot of solutions, if you talk about data science, AI, and ML, you can get as you want, but you are not going to get instant benefit, because you will have to wait for 5 to 6 months, even a year sometimes, to see what kind of impact that product has been able to make. So one of the strategy, or one of the approach which I have been able to adopt, is to talk about the amortized benefit in next 3 to 5 years, and have giving business a projection that you need to inject the money, that this is what is required for us to be at a stage where this business use case can be deployed live, but we'll still have to wait for let's say another 3 or 4 years to have some tangible commercial benefit seen. But I think we shouldn't just look at the 3 to 5 years down the line only we are going to have the benefit, because over time, we are also going to be able to accumulate a large amount of data, and your data product is going to be learning, so that benefit which I'm projecting right now may be 2 or 3 folds of what I projected. So it's all about, I think, having such conversation with the business and allowing them to also ask question from their side, and having a way to, I guess, balance it out. I don't have a really crystallized way of approaching this topic, but yeah, this is what I do. I don't know what he thinks about it, I guess.
Yeah, Pete. Oh, I believe you're on mute, Pete. Oh, no, we can't hear you. We're having some technical issues, which is, as I always say, how you know we're live and it's not, in fact, pre-recorded. I'll see if the team can help you out there, Pete. No, still not working. Okay. Well, team, we're going to have a moment here whilst we get both our thought leaders reconnected. In the meantime, of course, you can look around the platform at the resource area. We have lots of wonderful white papers and resources that you can download and have a read. Such a great conversation that now the clock is working against us because there's so many questions I do want to ask both Pete and Mohit when they are able to return. Get those questions in if you think of them. Take this as a moment to have a mental pause about what you've heard already in the first 15 minutes or so of this discussion. Have you got any questions you would like to ask? Please do pop those in. Now, I'm hoping potentially we have them back now.
Any joy now? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, can hear you.
Oh,
there we
good.
go. We are back. As I say, it's virtual events, right? Who'd think we'd still be here after all? But let's go back to it. Pete, what's your thought on that strategic tension between the business and the data function?
Yeah, of course, I've dried up on stage as well in person, so it can always go wrong, whatever you're doing. I'm always led by the business. Like Mayo said, technology is an enabler. So I don't have a right to be there. I don't have a right to build my team, to serve the organization, to spend their money. So I'm very much led by what they need me to achieve. And I think there's a lot that has to be done. We're talking about scale. So your scale would have come from a proof of concept or an MVP or something smaller you built in the first place. If you can't demonstrate the case for that to scale ahead of other things, then you shouldn't scale it. At the end of the day, the organization doesn't leave you there to have fun and to push things out. And I've been part of projects that have built things that are incredibly technically sophisticated and really quite exciting. But if there's no consumer for it, you can't just push it out there because you're committing funds and you're committing resource, because just pushing it out there leads to the support model. It leads to it being on people's machines, and therefore somebody has to support that. It leads to people having to answer phone calls if it goes down. It leads to licensing and commitments and the cost of data ingest and processing and storage. So you don't have the right to just push it out and hope that your point is made. So I think you have to put a lot of effort into the business case, the evangelism, and getting, I've been having this conversation today, strangely enough, getting people to put a commercial value behind what it is you're achieving. And that commercial value doesn't have to be cash. Some of the more climate change, environmental, social oriented projects don't generate money, but they do generate, positive brand enhancement for the company you're working for, or for, the greater societal good. And if the company decides that's where its budget should be invested, totally fine. But you don't have the right to just push a product out ahead of committing other work that the organization thinks have a greater value. So if you can't make the case for it, and the stakeholder who's pushing it can't make the case for it, you can't push it out. It's my view.
Great advice there. Now, when it comes to kind of key ingredients of scalability, I know there's often conversations over kind of solutions, platforms, and kind of the physical side of being able to scale it. And I know there's often a bit of a chicken and egg scenario here, whereas you kind of need it to scale, but then you don't want to have something. And then, as you say, that use cases turns that's not the best way to do it. And now you've got this legacy of debt, whether that be cost or resource towards it. So how do you balance that key ingredient to scalability of having the physical infrastructure in order to scale as well? Pete, I'll come to you first for that.
Yeah, this is a particular problem I have had in the past, where the idea proved to have great value and started running ahead of itself. And the more parts of the organization wanted to be on it because it was cool, it was interesting, and it was adding great value and great insight. And then you're trying to play catch up. So these are hard things to build in advance. I mean, you can put some projections in your business case and the reason why you started out on the product in the first place. You can put some hopefully some specification behind the sort of environment you'll need to support, the sort of licensing you need to have, the sort of bandwidth you might need to support it, the type of machines that people need to access it. But at the end of the day, you're always guessing a little bit as well. Unexpected problems. I've had this in the past of something small working on the network's fine. It looks like it's going to scale, and then all of a sudden it won't because everybody's heading back. In particular, in my experience, 3 times this has happened. It's been database threading. People trying to pull information from a database that worked when it was, 1 to 100 users or something in a controlled trial. Then you open it up wider, and all of a sudden the concurrence of all of these requests for information start damaging the database and starting to, I guess, get the right teams involved to understand those problems and then work out a solution. When the new shiny thing everybody wants to use, you're saying, oh, well, can you not use it now? Or in my situation, it was like, can you only use it on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays? And then the other half of the business can use it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those are the sort of problems that you have. So, it's important for me to make sure that, like in all projects, you've got everybody involved who might have a useful input up front. People that often get missed out are infrastructure, networks, support, and I think finance as well. So, trying to get them involved in this and then seeing how it's going to build and then working out what you'll need to do and taking some of the ownership of the problems so they can help you remove the barriers as you go, I think is really important. So make sure you build your team with the right contacts up front. And that way, hopefully you can inform the strategy of how you think will scale going forward.
Yeah, great. Mohit, I wonder if you can add some flavor to that as well.
I think a few things to add from my side. I've had this situation where we did not intend to go big, but very soon we realized that I think a lot of transactions are happening as part of the product, and we quickly need to scale up. And biggest barrier at that time is you have something up and running. You cannot obviously put that on pause and work on the physical environment and you try to scale it up and try to make it better. So obviously at that time we had to have some sort of tactical solution, but from a more strategic solution we started thinking about how do we address if such situation starts coming in the future. And that's where I go back to my design framework, right? I think one of the mentality or the mindset change which I've been trying to do as part of the team is think about the entire architecture even before proceeding with any kind of technical implementation, which is thinking about different facets of how the data can how the data is going to be inflowing and outflowing, and what kind of volume of the data is going to be there in the first instance, and what kind of scaling are we going to expect. So all those questions, when you have the answer to those questions, basically you are not looking to create one single solution. You are also trying to create maybe a generic solution which not only fits your small business needs, but at the same time, it is able to cater for the bigger business needs as well. So design framework has allowed us to, I think, start asking that question, which will allow us to, I think, build, first of all, fail faster. And if you are failing, then I think it is telling you something that it is not working, and at the same time, learning that thing is going to help you embed that learning as part of your design and make it better.
Yeah, it's such a difficult cultural thing to come to terms with, for sure. I know many have told me that it's something that they very much bring their graduates into as well, in terms of that upskilling of actually failure is good because it means you can move on to the next thing, and that culturally can be a bit of a challenge as well. Storytelling is a big topic we talk about here at Business of Data and Corinium. So I'm going to test both of your storytelling skills here by asking what has been some of the successes that you've experienced in scaling, and what you're able to share with us about that. Pete, I'll ask you first.
Yeah, thanks. I think so. I guess a lot of my scaling comes from data strategy, team development, and tool use cases, I think, as opposed to like a specific data product, although I've built those as well. And I think the things that I've been most proud of probably go back 20 odd years. So early in my career, there was I was in one of the leading British UK supermarkets, and we built this system that allowed people to monitor their performance in a local store, which may not sound that revolutionary, but at the time there was no real information like that. It was very clunky. This was a Java-based system when Java was new and exciting, and so all delivered in browser rather than through a tool set. So it was fabulous. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of looking back at it, and the problems that then ensued, was that it was sophisticated enough to know who was logging on and to know the areas of the shop they were responsible for and give them a very personalized view. And even like 10, 15 years later, joining other companies, being told that this was an impossible scenario. I said, well, actually it's not, and this is where your storytelling comes in, because you have to be able to explain that these things are possible. It might mean different data structures and different ways of capturing the organization of your organization, but it's totally possible. And being able to share those messages, I think, with some humility, without sounding like some sort of arrogant idiot in the corner of the room, is just telling people that all these things are totally possible. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've made that mistake as well in the past, because sometimes when you ask for your expertise, it's hard to share it without looking like you're showing off. But there's a really delicate fine line between being able to do that and just irritating people instead. So the scalability of this solution was fantastic. It went to every store. And as it went to every store, that's the first time I experienced this database threading problem that I've told you about. And because it was the first time we'd ever done anything like that, we had no idea what the problem was. And so at our fingertips, we had an incredible tool for driving performance. And then at the same time, we were heavily compromised by our ability to then tune it for performance and make sure everybody could use it. And the mitigations became very human and very manual. I talked about telling certain people they couldn't use it. That's actually what we did. You couldn't use it at certain times of the day. Certain parts of the organization couldn't use it at all. At the early parts of the trading week, it was quite mad. But then, we finally got underneath some of the technical problems and then slowly scaled it back up again. And it became a fantastic success story and allowed you to then, because you'd formed this sort of pipeline between you and the store, you could then use it to deliver other sorts of information as well. And so the scale became, well, it served this type of data, but now it's serving this and this and this. And, that allowed me to do some finance transformation work and start sharing financial as well as sales performance. And it became really, really powerful. And I think that was one of the earliest opportunities I had to understand something that was business oriented and business value driving. Whereas to that point, I'd always worked inside the technology function in my early careers as like a programmer and analyst and a sort of a team leader and stuff. So the storytelling benefit they gave me was understanding, exactly as we said earlier, that technology isn't the driver of the organization. Technology is the enabler. The business outcomes are the thing. And if you can't configure yourself to drive business outcomes, then you're in a world of pain. I think one other reflection on that product before I talk about something else is a learning point that I've picked up around training. So I naively and maybe somewhat arrogantly expected that giving everybody better information meant that everybody would make better, faster decisions. And actually, that's not true, because not everybody knows how to interpret data and apply it to a business problem. So this was 2000, 2001, and this is where my early actions around data literacy came in, because I was pretty comfortable with charts and graphs and presenting information. It turns out the people I was giving it to were not generally, and they didn't expect to have to use data to drive their their daily sort of performance and meet their objectives. They thought that getting stock out, getting on the shelves, being nice to customers and keeping a clean store was the thing to do. But there are ways to measure whether you're being successful in that. So a year or so in, we realized that actually we had to put together some basic training to help people understand this stuff, so that there was a minimum commitment to use this information to drive a business operation. And then from there, we could scale forward. But at that point, it became a real throttle back on the scaling opportunity, because it started to generate bad feeling, because even though you were better informed, there was an expectation you were making better decisions, and that wasn't the case. So I learned a lot about the need for different things to drive success, and that's kind of fed forward into a lot of what I talk about now around preparing the organization to accept something. The other thing I'll just talk briefly about was when data visualization became a really big hype around 2013, 2014, and some really powerful new tools came in. I brought one of those into the organization I was working at the time. And the stark contrast between the tool that I'd known in the past, I'm trying not to name names here, and what these new modern tools could do was revelatory. And I think was what really opened up big data for people, was the ability to see the information and not just have it all processed in the background. So being able to interact with it. And this became so impactful so quickly that I couldn't keep up with license purchases. And I ended up in a position where my team, actually me, was putting people in and out of the license pool every couple of hours so that somebody could have a go of the tool, produce an output, make a decision, and then I have to reassign the license to somebody else within the same day so they could then do the same thing. And then trying to keep procurement and legal and the technology function alongside that, and then getting it put onto people's PCs so they could still use it. These things became enormous barriers to scale, but again, have given me some insight into how quickly the things can grow, and making sure that you've got like an understanding of buying this thing here is great, but how are you going to buy more of it? And what's the sort of implications to the organization, to the procurement team in order to do that? And this comes into, I think, the greater commercial awareness around the products. And one of the reasons why being data centric can be quite exciting, but if you can impact the organization, you've got to understand the wider factors around what you're doing. I could talk forever on this one, so I'm not going to. I'm going to stop right there and let Mo have a go.
Yeah, I think what a great story there, especially in the wider experience as well that you've had with that just oversubscribed buy-in, which is something that many people will grapple with the idea of scaling up and then getting the business bought in. So it's really interesting to hear it from the other side, which is actually when you have people really excited, how do you control that passion in a meaningful way that it doesn't all just break and not be able to be used and you lose that buy-in as well. So thank you for telling us that story, Pete. Mohit, what story can you tell us with the success to scales that you've seen?
I think there are a few. So back in 2017-18, we started this journey to build, one of the machine learning model, which would basically, I think, as part of Collinson, we have been customer centric. Basically, I think most of the companies right now are customer centric. So we wanted to have a process which can lead us to provide better customer experience. And with the world relying a lot on recommending better products to the customer, we also wanted to build in-house product recommender. And I think that in turn would need not only a physical or I think an architecture which would support the recommender itself, but also the data which is going to be getting fed into the recommender. So we had two tasks at that time. First, how do we solve this problem with respect to the data, how this data is going to be collected, because we are talking about data being spread across the organization in disparate data sources. Where do we keep all this data, which is going to be quite useful for us to create this recommender? And I think, how do we build this platform? So that's when the very first data platform for Collinson in the cloud we started to build. I think at that time, as I said, technology was never at that time. I think I used to have still the perception that I think maybe we are not there yet in terms of the technology. So we started heavily relying on open source, and I think we started building everything from scratch without ever knowing the implication of open source, because there are many. I think if you have the time, I can talk about that as well. But we started building it, and the ambition was to create one single source of truth. At that time, people are calling it data lake, but I think it's just a concept, right? Okay, I think basically what you want to do is have a place where you can put all the data so that anything from a business requirement point of view can be delivered. So the first thing was, obviously, while we are building this data platform, we are also in parallel thinking about how this architecture for product recommender is going to be built, so that I think we can have a connection. Now, I'm not going to talk about the complete roadmap of the event, how did that occur, but uh, what it led to is, first of all, business had these questions, I think, why are you even doing it? Why are you even, building the single source of truth? Was the need? And, I think being able to answer that, we are building this recommender, but we need the data to be in a single place, but can't you just connect to all these data sources? So it was a really tough battle to first convince, I think we need to have the single place, because we are not trying to just solve the problem of having one single place to connect, but also the problem of scalability. Because what we see, I think we don't know to what extent this product recommender is going to be used. We may see that in first few months only 1,000 customers are interacting, but may become million in a very short span of time. So how would we at that time counteract if that happens? So you really need to have an infrastructure which can support that. So I think that's when the recommender is already built. We have this data platform up and running off the back of open source. And when we look back, I guess I think those questions are not there anymore. First of all, I think business already has got the answer for the question in terms of the scalability, because for last 3 years we have been running the platform, as well as and it's been 2 years since the recommender is live, and it is still able to scale up on its own. The data volume has not been a challenge. Scalability is not been a challenge, but there has been a challenge of continuous modernization happening outside in terms of the technology. So we really need. So now it's not so much about scalability for us. It's about now the performance. It's like I think you when you talk about scalability, you're talking about whether you are able to do this thing or not. I think we are, but I think it's taking a really long time. So I think maybe we need to modernize ourselves further and further. So I think this is one of the story which may be appropriate for this one.
Amazing, Mohit. Thank you so much. I love that. Less about scalability and into performance. Really, really fantastic journey. Thank you. Now, I think I've probably got time to ask one last question. And I think it's really interesting, obviously, the period of time that we've just gone through. So many organizations, in fact, pretty much every organization has gone through some form of transformation, whether that's a case of they went from fully on-prem to then working from home and scaling that up. Obviously, technology, IT, and data teams being a huge part of that, or just moving their services, products, etc., digitally, because they can't be in brick and mortar situations anymore due to COVID. And I'm keen to know from both of you, through that huge transformation and that requirement, just pure requirement to scale, it was non-negotiable. What has that been like for your team now? What impact has that had on you? Is there still that expectation to kind of scale quickly? Has it created new user cases for you? What's that experience been like for you? Pete, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer, that one. The lockdown happened, and these crazy times happened just as my data strategy was taking off. So we were already in a period of great transition and doing different sorts of work, but mostly in the background. We're building the foundational elements of what would become now, a successful rollout of self-service Power BI, cloud computing, etc. So in many ways, there was a great advantage to lockdown for my team, because A, they'd like remote working, B, there were no distractions in the office, and the reduction of travel. So I think we probably spent more productive time working directly on the technology and bringing to life, the new data platform that was going to underpin the journey we were about to go on. So that was undoubtedly successful. There were great challenges for teams outside of mine, the infrastructure teams, etc., to make sure that that environment was stood up very quickly and people were able to, get home, have a workstation, and be able to contribute like that. And then over time, I think actually this way of working has benefited many teams like mine, who are maybe more technology focused. The bit that's changed is I changed the structure of my team to try and separate out some of the more technical individuals who like being at the code line and developing their bits and pieces, and product management type leadership positions where interaction with the business is a significant expectation, because we're trying to build up that product management feel and work out where the organization is going and how we can contribute. And I think those scenarios are somewhat compromised in the way that we're doing this, because there's something just doesn't beat sitting down and talking to somebody about a commercial problem. That's a bit harder to do on a screen like this. So our products have scaled because we're rolling out a Teams 365, Power BI. That's already built for enterprise use. The company was on the journey, and so our tools have scaled with us. And I think the thing that we're trying now to grapple with is what's the appropriate working model to make sure that that technology scales, for the data opportunities alongside the commercial expectations of the organization, and how we mesh together and how we enable that. And I think there's a lot of intensive work going on to determine that. And we don't yet have the answers. For the moment, we're feeling our way, but we are being successful, which is great.
Amazing. Well, Pete, thank you so much for joining us today. Mohit, how about yourself? What has that last few years, what impact has that had on your team?
I think pandemic has been the biggest, I think maybe a learning event for the team in a long time, because first of all, I think especially if I talk about my team, we had so much of work to do despite of I think that pandemic going on, and we started realizing that the roles and responsibility which we have been given, I guess we need to have a slight change to that. Okay, I think for a data scientist, it became really important to spend time with the business to understand the domain of the business, and then being able to I think take the requirement carefully and then do the assessment carefully. It was not so much about just go and build an ML model and you are going to be able to deploy. It was about being able to listen to the business, their pain points, and so it's like natural transition for a lot of data scientists in the team, being able to just say and come to me and say that, okay, I think we think we are at that stage where we need to have more business understanding, because it is then going to lead us to develop a better model. It is not about a better model anymore, to be honest. It's about creating a model, a basic one at first, which can then be deployed, and then you can incrementally learn from it, and you can incrementally keep enhancing it. The second thing, I think what happened, I really say it a lot. I think a lot changes happen in the data engineering world. People, I think in last 2 years, if you have seen, a lot of attention has been given to data engineers. I think in many industries, because our organization is also part of it, where we started realizing, I guess I think how important the data is, and then in turn it also started affecting the mindset of data engineers, who started realizing, I guess, there's a lot of value to stay in the company and and work on such a transformational piece, where we are just going to be building this data platform or trying to modernize it further and further. And another thing which happened is that it also created a hybrid between a data scientist and a data engineer, where a lot of people started identifying their skills, which is kind of I think a composition of a data scientist and data engineer. So which allowed them to not only work with the business, but also I think work from a more technical standpoint. So yeah, I think pandemic, I would say, has changed mindset a lot. I think in last 2 years.
Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us. Well, thank you both. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today for this session. And I did make a joke at the start about having to keep an eye on the time. The team have done a sterling job of keeping me on task, because this is certainly a conversation that we could extend much further as well. But thank you both so much. Now, in just a moment here, we will be heading into our final session of the European stage of day one at the Business Data Festival. And we'll see you in a moment's time.